A flight attendant disregarded the Black CO's son's dietary needs, but the father calmly handed over court papers, and the entire cabin went silent. A flight attendant served the Black CEO's son peanuts, knowing he was allergic, thinking no one would notice. He didn't realize the father was ready to serve him something far more serious: court papers. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when real authority takes action. Redden Voss slid the snack tray into position with deliberate precision, the overhead lights casting a pale gleam across the metal rim. The faint buzz of the aircraft's systems hummed beneath the cabin's polished silence, broken only by the occasional cough or the soft rustling of seatbelts. Seat 1A remained still. Dr. Kalen Dravon sat upright, eyes closed, one hand resting protectively on the slim black medical kit tucked beside his seat, the other loosely covering his 10-year-old son's fingers. Jalen shifted beside him, rubbing at his throat with small fingers. "Dad, it feels a little scratchy," he whispered, voice hoarse. Kalen leaned down, brushing Jalen's curls aside with a gentle hand. "Probably just dry cabin air," he murmured, offering a reassuring smile. "Try to rest. We'll be there in 3 hours." Across the aisle, Redden Voss stood silently, watching. His lips were pulled into a slight smirk, but his eyes were hard, calculating. He had seen the manifest the moment it printed, and one name had stopped him cold: Dravon Kalen. The same man who had rejected his data integration proposal 2 years ago at a compliance summit in Virulent. The same man who, with a single line in a review document, had labeled Redden's cross-platform allergy tracker inconsistent and ethically unclear. That phrase alone had tanked his pitch to 3 potential investors. He remembered it well. And now here Dravon was, sitting in seat 1A, of all places, with his son. He leaned toward the junior attendant, a slender, nervous young man named Marek Vale, and whispered low, "Watch seat 1A closely." Marek blinked. "Sorry, why? Is there an issue?" "Just watch," Redden said, voice clipped. As Marek stepped away, still puzzled, Redden returned to the galley. He opened the lower snack drawer, where clearly labeled bins separated allergy-safe items from standard offerings. The manifest had been marked with a red flag: Passenger 1A, severe peanut allergy. It was even highlighted in bold on the cabin control panel. Redden's finger hovered over the sealed peanut packets. He tapped one against his palm slowly, as though weighing not just its contents, but its consequences. He selected the tray deliberately. 3 bottles of water, 2 napkins, a small ceramic bowl, 1 packet of honey-roasted peanuts, emptied smoothly into the dish like it was routine. He positioned the tray so the peanuts didn't look obvious, just another salty snack blend. Meanwhile, Kalen pulled a slim folder from his briefcase, the compliance review report he needed to present to the Eldric's Regulatory Council after landing. It was the reason he was flying in person instead of remotely. The council insisted on in-person authentication for all data linked to pediatric risk environments. The irony wasn't lost on him. He tapped the folder lightly, then turned to check on Jalen. The boy had closed his eyes again, breathing softly. A bit of color was returning to his cheeks. Kalen glanced up to see Redden approaching, tray in hand. "Water for you, sir," Redden said smoothly. "And a little something for your son, in case he wakes up." Kalen's eyes flicked to the bowl. "These aren't peanuts, right?" Redden's smile didn't flinch. "No, sir. Safe snack mix. All allergy screened." Kalen gave a short nod, trusting the answer. He adjusted the folder on his tray table, mind already shifting toward the presentation slides he'd be narrating in just a few hours. He didn't notice that Jalen's hand had moved. Half asleep, the boy reached instinctively toward the small bowl. His fingers brushed the edge. He took a small handful and popped them into his mouth without opening his eyes. Redden stood back, hands behind his back now, watching. Kalen turned back just as Jalen coughed, a short, dry sound. Then another, then a hitching wheeze. "Jalen?" Kalen asked quickly, the chair creaking as he shifted toward his son. Jalen's eyes flew open, and his hands went to his throat. His lips trembled, and he gasped shallow, broken breaths. Kalen was already reaching for the medical kit. Sir, please wait, Redden interjected, stepping forward swiftly, hand up as if issuing a command. We need to verify. He's having a reaction. Kalen barked, already opening the flap, pulling the first injector free. Redden moved in closer. Protocol requires verification before unauthorized medication is administered. Kalen's voice turned cold. Move. A few passengers had begun turning in their seats. Murmurs built like a rising tide. In the dim cabin light, Jalen's face had begun to swell, his lips puffy, his breathing wheezy and erratic. Redden reached out, as if to block Kalen's arm. Kalen didn't hesitate. He pushed the injector into Jalen's thigh and pressed. The hiss of the auto dose filled the space between them. Sir, you can't. Get out of my way, Kalen snapped, eyes blazing. Now, around them, passengers gasped as the tension finally shattered. A steward in business class stood halfway, unsure whether to intervene. Marikvale hovered behind Redden, face pale and panicked. Kalen turned back to his son, supporting Jalen's head gently as the boy gasped for air, tears brimming in his eyes. One hand still clutched the armrest with white knuckles. From somewhere deeper in the cabin, someone shouted, "Does he need oxygen?" Kalen looked up. Yes, now. But Redden didn't move. He tapped something on his cabin tablet, fingers swift, clinical. Behind Kalen's seat, the overhead screen blinked to life. Passenger 1A. Incident flagged / behavioral alert. Unauthorized medical administration. Kalen stared at the screen, then at Redden. You're reporting me? He asked, disbelief lining every syllable. Redden smiled faintly. Just following procedure, Dr. drave on. The cabin's hum felt louder now. Tighter. Kalen wrapped his arms around his son and pulled him close, one hand gripping the emergency kit again. He didn't know what was worse, that Redden was lying to him, or that he knew exactly why. And that collision was closer than anyone realized. The moment Jalen's fingers closed around the handful of snacks, the cabin still hummed in a low, comfortable rhythm, just enough to mask the subtle snap of a peanut shell breaking under his grip. He brought the morsels to his mouth with the absent-minded trust of a child who believed his father had ensured everything was safe. Kalen, seated inches away, was lost in his compliance files, reviewing policy language that could shift regulatory tides, never imagining the greater danger was already resting quietly beside his son. The first warning came not from a sound, but from stillness. Jalen's body tensed. His eyes, half-lidded with sleep moments ago, now widened with panic. A sharp gasp escaped him, brittle and desperate, as he clutched at his throat. The tray beside him rattled slightly as his knee jolted. Kalen's head snapped up. He knew that sound. It wasn't confusion or discomfort. It was the sound of a blocked airway trying to force breath through a tightening passage. His heart dropped. Jalen. Kalen's voice was low and urgent, already pulling open the emergency medical kit. His hands moved fast, trained from repeated drills at home. He grasped the injector, twisted the safety cap off in one motion, and was immediately blocked. Redden Voss stepped into the aisle with calculated ease, one arm outstretched across Kalen's movement. Sir, I need to verify the situation before you proceed, he said with artificial calm, his voice practiced, almost rehearsed. Kalen blinked. Move, he growled, keeping one arm around his son. Jalen was wheezing now, his lips tinged blue at the edges. I understand your concern, Redden replied, keeping his body in the aisle like a barricade. But we must follow protocol when administering any injectable substances on board. Kalen's mind raced. That's my son. He's having an allergic reaction. I already filed the allergy documentation. Get out of the way. A few heads turned in nearby seats, drawn by the rising pitch in Kalen's voice. Passengers began murmuring. One man in 1C stood halfway, trying to see. Redden's expression didn't change. There's no clear indication of allergen exposure. It might be hyperventilation. Panic symptoms. Kalen's voice cracked. He ate the snacks you gave us. You said they weren't peanuts. They weren't labeled as such, Redden replied coolly, raising his voice just slightly so others could hear. You didn't ask for ingredient verification. Kalen didn't respond. He dropped to his knees beside Jalen, arms still brushing against Redden's legs. Jalen's chest heaved in irregular spasms, and his hand weakly reached toward his father. "I need to give him a shot now," Kalen said, no longer asking. But as he moved to press the injector into Jalen's thigh, Redden grabbed his wrist, not violently, but with just enough force to halt him. "I'm required to evaluate before authorizing emergency medication," Redden said through gritted teeth. "That's policy. It's not policy when someone is dying in front of you," Kalen shouted, yanking his arm free. Passengers were fully alert now. A child crying in row 2A added to the noise, and more people began rising from their seats. Redden stepped back as if offended, raising his hands in mock innocence. "Sir is becoming aggressive. I may need assistance," he announced toward the galley, tapping his tablet screen twice. Kalen caught the motion out of the corner of his eye. Something had been logged, but not truthfully. Still on his knees, Kalen steadied Jalen and jammed the injector into his son's thigh. The device hissed sharply. Jalen's body flinched and his eyes fluttered. But the reaction wasn't slowing. His throat was still closing. Kalen checked the second injector slot. It was missing. "Where's the backup?" he whispered, almost to himself. Behind him, Redden muttered, "Using unauthorized medication will be recorded as a passenger violation under Safety Clause 3C. If the reaction continues, you may be responsible." "Kalen Spoon, you caused this. You served peanuts. You lied." Gasps spread through the nearby rows. A man with a phone began filming discreetly. "I serve a standard snack," Redden replied coldly, "and I asked the appropriate allergy verification question. You said nothing at the time." "That's a lie," Kalen said through clenched teeth, standing now with one arm still cradling Jalen. "We declared it. It was on the manifest." "That information is privileged to crew handling," Redden said smugly. "And I saw no notation." Kalen's mind burned. The notation had been there. He'd confirmed it, which meant someone had overridden it. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, breathless. "This isn't about protocol." Redden gave the faintest shrug. "Maybe you're just used to getting your way." Kalen stared, suddenly aware that this was personal. This wasn't confusion. It wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. Another jolt of turbulence shook the plane. A tray toppled in the galley. The lights flickered briefly. Kalen didn't wait. He ducked beneath Redden's arm, reached into the lower compartment of his bag, and pulled out the second injector just as a new figure emerged. Marek Vale, the junior attendant, pale and wide-eyed. He saw the scene and hesitated, eyes flicking from Redden to the boy gasping for air. "You," Kalen said, voice sharp. "Either help or get out of the way." Marek froze. Kalen pushed Jalen's sleeve up and injected again. Silence held the cabin for 3 seconds. Then, finally, Jalen's breathing began to slow. Not perfect, not steady, but no longer gasping. Kalen stayed beside him, whispering soft encouragements as his eyes locked back on Redden, who was already tapping another log into his tablet. And those seconds were slipping away faster than anyone expected. Kalen pushed past Redden with force that surprised even himself, his hand clenching the injector like a lifeline. Jalen's eyes had widened to full circles, lips already purpling at the edges, hands trembling as he weakly clawed at his throat. Kalen dropped to his knees beside the seat and drove the injector into his son's thigh with practiced precision, his fingers shaking, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Hold on, Jalen. Just breathe, I'm right here." The sharp hiss of the auto-injector broke through the surrounding silence like a flare, but relief didn't follow. Jalen's breathing remained labored, his chest heaving in shallow bursts, a soft wheeze trailing each attempt to inhale. Around them, murmurs rose like a tide. Several passengers stood halfway in their seats, confused, anxious. One man across the aisle was already fumbling for his phone. Another tapped the call button repeatedly. But Redden Voss didn't flinch. Standing just behind Kalen, he pulled out his crew-issued tablet, tapped rapidly, and then spoke with an unsettling calm. "Passenger 1, administering unverified medication. Incident logged under code 72C. Potential abuse of controlled substances during flight. Kalen's head snapped up. What did you just say? Redden didn't answer. His fingers danced across the screen, filing a report in real time, as if this were just another routine inconvenience. Dramatic irony rippled through the cabin. Every nearby passenger had seen the boy collapse, had heard Kalen ask if the snack was safe. They knew Redden was lying, and Redden knew they knew. But his voice rose, steady and authoritative, as if volume alone could bury the truth. Marek Vale, the junior attendant, hovered behind him. His hands gripped the edge of the galley curtain, his face pale. He opened his mouth twice to speak, but said nothing. Kalen stood, his body trembling not with fear, but rage barely contained. My son is having an allergic reaction. He needs oxygen. Now. Redden stepped forward, raising his palm. Captain authorization is required for access to emergency oxygen. Until that's received, I need you to remain calm and stay seated. Calm. Kalen barked, his voice cracking under pressure. He's going into anaphylactic shock. But Redden stayed where he was, creating a wall of obstruction with nothing but presence and protocol. Behind them, a tray clattered to the floor as turbulence jolted the aircraft. The overhead lights flickered once, dimmed, then steadied. Jalen whimpered in his seat, his hands fluttering uselessly as he slumped sideways. Kalen spun back, reaching for the bag beneath his seat. He needed the second injector. The first had bought them time, but it wouldn't be enough. Yet the moment he bent down, Redden took a step closer and said loudly, "Do not access unauthorized materials while the cabin is in motion. Failure to comply may result in restraint." That word, restraint, froze the aisle. A man near the front stood up fully now, his voice cutting through the cabin. "Let him help his kid. Are you serious?" Another voice joined in. "I saw you hand the snack to the boy." "We all did." Still, Redden remained unmoved. Flight safety operations require controlled handling of onboard incidents. Unauthorized interventions risk broader disruption. It was theater. Kalen could see it now, not incompetence, not fear, but calculation. Every move, every delay, was crafted not just to block his actions, but to provoke an escalation that could be twisted into a justification for punishment. He could almost hear the future report being written. Passenger became agitated, attempted to breach flight safety protocols. Crew responded according to training. Redden was setting the stage for a cover-up in real time. Kalen rose slowly, his hands still raised slightly, not in surrender, but in warning. "You do not get to kill my son with policies you made up just to protect yourself." For a second, silence held. Then a passenger behind them, a man in business attire with a red tie, moved forward. "I'm recording this now," he said, lifting his phone. "If that boy dies, it's on you. All of it." The tension cracked. A second phone appeared, then a third. The tide of witness turned. Redden's eyes flicked to Marek, then to the overhead PA system, but he didn't move. The illusion of authority was fracturing. Kalen didn't waste another second. He dropped to one knee, yanked the bag open, and rummaged until his fingers closed around the second injector. He didn't even rise, just turned, guided Jalen's leg into position, and pressed down. This time, Jalen's body jolted slightly. The wheezing shifted into raspier, deeper breaths, still shaky, but stronger. His eyes fluttered, and his fingers clenched around Kalen's wrist like a child holding onto a lifeline in a storm. Above them, the cabin lights remained dim. The tray still lay on the floor. Redden's tablet screen blinked, waiting for his next entry. Kalen looked up, not at Redden, but past him. "If he survives this," he said calmly, voice low, "you'll be reading that report in court." Redden didn't answer, but something changed in his posture. A stiffness, a hesitation, and Kalen noticed it, because behind the facade of cold procedure, Redden was no longer just improvising. He was hiding something, a motive deeper than personal spite, something Kalen had yet to name, but could already sense waiting at the edge of the storm. Foreshadowing whispered that this flight was not random. Redden's hostility came from personal motives connected to a failed contract with Dravon Systems 2 years earlier. Kalen's objective shifted. Save Jalen first, then exposed what Redden had done. As Jalen's breathing weakened further, Kalen's calm shattered into urgency. And in that urgency, the truth began to fight its way into the open. The shouts sliced through the pressurized silence like a crack in the cabin wall. "I said move." Kalen's voice trembled with urgency, not rage, as he knelt beside his son, injector in hand, while Jalen's breath came in wheezing gasps. His skin had gone pale, lips swollen, and fingers twitching as his body fought to breathe. All around them, passengers had risen in alarm, eyes wide, hands frozen midair with drinks or phones, unsure whether to intervene or stay clear. Some clutched armrests. Others just stared. Captain Orrin Drexel stepped out from the cockpit, face taut, brow furrowed with the weight of command. His voice came low but commanding. "What's going on here?" Kalen didn't look up. "Allergy emergency. My son needs oxygen. Now." Redden Voss was already in position, standing halfway between the rows and the cockpit, posture rigid, arms crossed as if shielding something sacred. "Captain, this man's causing panic." He claimed an allergy emergency, but served the snack himself. That lie hit Kalen like a slap. "He's twisting everything." Kalen's voice cracked. He turned to the captain, cradling Jalen with one arm, holding the injector with the other. "He gave my son a bowl of peanuts. After I confirmed twice, it was safe." The captain's eyes darted between them. Sweat beaded at his temple. Protocol wars were nightmares in the sky. He looked to Redden, then to the growing crowd, then back to Kalen. "We need oxygen." "I've been trying," Kalen snapped. "He's locked the system." Captain Drexel turned toward the galley. "Unlock the panel." "That's an order." Redden didn't flinch. "I can't, sir. Safety protocol states override access remains with lead crew if emergency isn't confirmed." Kalen's heart thundered. His son's chest barely moved now, rising in shallow, jerky pulls of air. There was no time to debate. This is a confirmed emergency. He's going into anaphylaxis. You want a child's death on your manifest. Still, Redden stood there, stoic, unmoved, shielded by vague policies and hidden motives. And then a voice came, quiet, unsure, trembling. "Captain, it was Marek Vale." The junior attendant stepped forward, voice barely audible over the soft hum of the engines and the rattling breaths of Jalen. I saw him. I saw Redden put the peanuts in the bowl." His voice cracked. He knew. Gasps rippled through the aisle. A passenger whispered, "What did he say?" Phones began to rise. Cameras were already rolling. Captain Drexel's expression collapsed into disbelief. "Redden." "Sir," Redden interjected, tone defensive now. "That's not accurate." The allergy notice was ambiguous. It wasn't visible on the manifest in the correct field. Miscommunication at most. Kalen had stopped listening. His fingers moved fast, pushing aside Jalen's soft blanket and unzipping the outer flap of his travel bag. The second injector was there, protected inside a nylon sleeve. As the crowd pushed forward, trying to understand what was happening, Kalen used his body like a barrier, shielding his son from the chaos behind him. Jalen's eyes fluttered. "Not yet," Kalen whispered, hand steady despite the tremor rising in his chest. He pressed the second injector into Jalen's thigh. A sharp hiss followed. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, slowly, like a paper inflating under pressure, Jalen's chest began to rise deeper. His wheezing softened. His fingers unclenched. The crowd exhaled, some without realizing they'd held their breath. Captain Drexel stepped aside and grabbed the cabin phone. "Command, we have an obstructed medical emergency with override refusal. Prepare for emergency protocol activation." Redden's composure slipped. "You can't override without FAA confirmation." "I just did," Drexel said flatly. "You've endangered a child." Passengers began to speak out now. "I saw the whole thing. He asked about the peanuts twice. That's the boy from seat 1A. He warned them before takeoff. Phones angled. Evidence archived." But Redden didn't back down. Instead, he took a single step forward, jaw tight, voice low. "You think I did this for no reason?" His tone had changed. Not defensive anymore. Calculating. Kalen turned, still on his knees, eyes narrowing. Something about that tone didn't belong to the moment, it belonged to a strategy. You knew who I was, Kalen said slowly. You saw my name. Redden said nothing, but his gaze flicked, just once, toward the sealed folder Kalen had used to shield the injector. A folder with the Eldric's Regulatory Council seal embossed faintly in silver. Kalen understood then. This wasn't random. It wasn't personal anymore. You tried to derail me, he whispered. Redden gave no confirmation, but the silence around them, sharp, sudden, and electric, was confirmation enough. Captain Drexel approached with a final warning. You are relieved of duty, Redden. Step aside before this becomes criminal. But Redden's expression had shifted again, not with fear, but with the final realization that his sabotage had failed. Kalen looked down at Jalen, still weak, still pale, but breathing, and exhaled through clenched teeth. He wasn't just holding a child. He was holding the reason this entire scheme had just failed. Passengers parted as Kalen stood, arms firm around his son. The flight wasn't over, but the game had changed, and that strategy was about to explode into full view. Release the override, the captain repeated, this time with firmer authority. His voice carried through the tense cabin, slicing through the murmurs of passengers who had been watching in disbelief. Kalen didn't flinch, still crouched beside Jalen, who lay limp but breathing. Oxygen hissed softly now, finally flowing into the boy's mask. For a moment, it seemed like clarity had returned to the flight, until Redden Voss took one deliberate step back, crossed his arms, and said coldly, I'm invoking Section 42F. The passenger in 1A is carrying an unauthorized signal control case. He's in violation of Federal Aviation Control Zone parameters. Kalen's head snapped up. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice controlled but tight with disbelief. The only thing I've brought on board, aside from my son's medical kit, is a laptop and a binder. And that case? That's his allergy response unit. But Redden was already holding up a tablet. On the screen, frozen mid-frame, was a surveillance still. Kalen at the terminal security checkpoint, holding Jalen's dark metallic allergy kit. It looked bulky, rectangular, medical, but easily misinterpreted. This image, Redden said with performative calm, was forwarded to our Midair security channel. Based on flight regulation subclauses, I have authority to maintain override access until we land and the case is verified. The tension in the cabin snapped into confusion. A few passengers who had been vocal earlier now looked at one another uncertainly. Kalen could see it, the shift, doubt, the quiet erosion of public support. The very people who had just stood between him and Redden now began to lean away slightly, their courage bruised by the possibility that something deeper was playing out. You're twisting this, Kalen said, standing up slowly. That image is my son's epinephrine delivery case. It's listed in my passenger profile, pre-cleared through Valor Sky Medical. He turned to Captain Drexel, who still stood by the cockpit door, conflicted. You have my digital medical profile on file. My son's allergy, the tools we carry, it's all in the registry. The captain hesitated. His gaze shifted from Kalen to Redden and back. We did receive the manifest notice. But this image, if it was forwarded through a federal channel, it wasn't, Kalen interrupted, voice rising. It was sent by him, he pointed to Redden. He's staging this. You need to check the source routing of that file. I'm telling you, this is deeper than just a miscommunication. And then, quietly from just behind the beverage cart, came a voice. I heard him say it. All heads turned. Marek Vale, the junior attendant, was pale and visibly shaking. His hands gripped the edge of the galley counter like he needed it to stay upright. He told me earlier, he said, this'll ruin his credibility permanently. I thought it was just frustration, but he meant it. The words fell like a thunderclap. Kalen stared at Marek, his breath catching for a moment. The captain's eyebrows rose in disbelief. Passengers stirred again, a few rising in their seats. Redden's mask cracked. You're out of line, he snapped at Marek, stepping toward him. But the captain blocked him. That's enough, Captain Drexel said. His voice had changed. It was no longer unsure. Redden, you'll stand down. Right now. But before Redden could respond, the cockpit console beeped. A priority message flashed. The captain tapped it open. His eyes scanned the line of text once, twice. He looked up, jaw tight. "We just received a directive from ground control," he said slowly. "It states, secure 1A passenger upon landing. Allergy narrative flagged for investigation." Kalen's heart sank. He turned cold. "They flagged me," he said, stunned. "Even after my son nearly." He couldn't finish. The weight of what had just happened slammed into him. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a rash reaction from a bitter flight attendant. It was a coordinated action, shaped to look like regulation, twisted to seem like policy, and sent down the chain with perfect timing to paralyze response. He turned toward the captain again. "Listen to me. This was never about safety. This is about sabotaging me. There's a motive behind this, one that doesn't end with this flight." Redden's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak. Kalen slowly reached into his bag, careful to make every movement visible. He retrieved a small, sealed envelope, the medical card that carried Jalen's Valersky verified allergy registry. He held it out to the captain, arm extended but steady. "This," he said, "was filed with your airline. It's been in your system for over 2 years. It's time-stamped, cross-checked, and digitally signed. That case in the picture." He nodded toward the image on the tablet, still displayed. "It's listed right here." The captain took the envelope. As he opened it, Marek silently stepped closer, a quiet act of redemption. Passengers were filming again. The tide was turning, but not fast enough. Kalen could already see how the narrative would be twisted, how a frozen frame, misread badge, and manipulated override could drown the truth before it ever surfaced. But something inside him was changing. Not just a father's panic, but a strategist's awakening. He looked at Redden with eyes no longer full of fear, but filled with calculation. "This wasn't a mistake," Kalen said, more to himself than anyone else. "And when sabotage wears the mask of regulation, justice must be unmasked in return." The oxygen hissed as the mask finally slipped over Jalen's face. Kalen held it there with steady hands, his fingers trembling only slightly as the airflow picked up. Jalen's chest rose in quick, shallow gasps, still panicked, still disoriented. His skin was blotchy, and his lips, though no longer blue, were dry and pale. Kalen leaned in close, whispering softly, "You're okay, son. You're okay. Breathe with me, in and out." His voice remained calm by force, not instinct. The moment demanded calm, even if his soul was screaming. But Jalen wasn't responding the way Kalen expected. Though his vitals were slowly stabilizing, his eyes darted, unfocused. He flinched when Kalen adjusted the elastic strap of the mask. His body trembled, and when he tried to speak, his words came out garbled, slurred syllables barely forming shape. Kalen's heart clenched. This wasn't just a physical crisis. It had punctured something deeper. The allergic reaction had flung Jalen into a full-blown trauma response. From the cockpit, Captain Orrin Drexel's voice echoed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an onboard medical emergency, we'll be conducting an emergency landing at Valoran City Airport. Please remain seated and calm." Kalen barely heard the rest. Valoran, of all places. He knew Valoran's reputation, high security, protocol-obsessed, more suited to holding cells than pediatric care. Still, they had no choice. He tightened his grip on Jalen's hand. Around them, the cabin had gone eerily quiet, like a theater before a dramatic climax. Passengers exchanged glances. A few whispered. Some watched Kalen with sympathy, others with suspicion. He saw a man 2 rows behind angle his phone, recording again. Redden Voss had vanished from view, but his absence felt like poison still floating in the air. Kalen's instincts told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Carefully, he leaned over to the overhead compartment, retrieved his steel gray case, and clicked it open. This wasn't just a medical kit anymore. Inside, past the rows of labeled injectors and wipes, nestled within a foam-lined compartment, sat a slim digital module, no larger than a paperback, housing a backup of the allergy protocol registry Kalen had helped build for Valersky 2 years ago. It carried encrypted logs of every flagged passenger, allergy alerts, crew override commands, and most damning of all, access logs showing exactly when someone bypassed a safety measure. He didn't need guesses anymore. He needed proof. His thumb hovered over the biometric pad, and it lit green. The screen blinked alive. As the aircraft gently banked into its descent, Kalen navigated to the override history. His eyes scanned the entries. There was Redden Voss's crew ID timestamped at the exact moment Kalen had requested oxygen. Override denied. Rationale, suspected misuse. He tapped further. The code hadn't come from standard flight medical protocol. It was flagged as a manual override, unauthorized, masked under a false internal ID. Someone had tampered with the system. Redden hadn't just ignored Kalen. He had made him look like the threat. Kalen's mind raced. If this data landed in the wrong hands first, the narrative would collapse against him before he could speak. That still from the surveillance cam, Redden's attempt to frame Jalen's allergy kit as suspicious equipment suddenly made more sense. The false behavioral report, the delay, the confiscation attempt, it had all been a setup orchestrated to discredit Kalen in the eyes of federal and aviation authorities. But why? He exhaled, steadying his pulse. He didn't know the full picture yet, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let the silence speak louder than the truth. Redden had cloaked sabotage in regulation. Now, Kalen had to turn that regulation inside out and expose it for what it really was. The captain stepped briefly into the cabin, walking toward Kalen. His face was taut with worry. "We'll be on the ground in 12 minutes, he said, eyes flicking between Kalen and the medical kit. "Do you want to submit a statement before we land? Just to have it on file." His voice held a forced neutrality, as if he was trying to do the right thing, without choosing sides. Kalen didn't look up immediately. He pressed one final command, encrypting the file and tagging it for legal access. Then he closed the case. "I'll submit something else," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Court papers." The captain blinked, uncertain whether he had heard correctly. Several passengers nearby shifted in their seats, glancing at each other. One man raised his eyebrows. Another murmured, "Did he say court?" But Kalen said nothing more. He just turned back to Jalen, adjusting the oxygen mask and brushing a damp curl from his son's forehead. A quiet storm had settled over him, not explosive, but coiled and patient, ready to move with precision. And when that storm landed, it wouldn't shake the wings, it would shake the boardroom. The moment the wheels of Valor Sky Flight 771 touched down at Valorant City Airport, a hush seemed to ripple through the cabin, dense and expectant. Kalen Dravon sat stiffly in seat 1, his son Jalen's head resting against his chest, breath shallow, but no longer gasping. The oxygen mask hung loosely in the boy's hand, his fingers still trembling. Kalen's mind raced, not with fear, but with calculation. He knew what was coming. The overhead chimes sounded, signaling arrival, but the unease in the air was palpable. Then came the movement. A team of security officers moved with intention down the aisle, ignoring curious glances from passengers and brushing past the flight attendants without a word. Their posture made it clear. They weren't here for questions. They were here for removal. One officer tapped his radio. "We have visual on 1A. Proceeding." Kalen's jaw tightened. He gently shifted Jalen's weight and wrapped his arm protectively around the boy, silently preparing to defend against the next injustice. But before the officers could reach them, a voice broke the current. "That won't be necessary." The lead guard turned. A young man stood firmly in their path, dressed in a sharp gray vest, a discreet badge glinting from his lapel. He held up a sleek identification tablet. "Malik Varon, Legal Liaison, Federal Aviación Compliance Tribunal." His voice was calm, clipped, and carried the authority of someone who knew the weight behind his words. The guards hesitated. One leaned in. "We were told, I know what you were told," Malik said, his eyes never leaving Kalen. "But the situation has changed. I've been monitoring it since mid-flight." Kalen's eyes narrowed in cautious recognition. Malik stepped forward and held up a photo from his device, an image of Kalen's SEAL medical kit. "Is this the one referenced in your pre-filed passenger compliance clause?" Kalen didn't waste a second. "It is." He handed the kit over without removing Jalen from his lap. Malik scanned the embedded tag. The code pinged. A green bar pulsed across the screen. Matched fact registry. The confirmation rang louder than any announcement. Turning toward the crew, Malik's tone hardened. I'll need the crew lead's flight log and override file now. Red and Voss appeared from behind the galley wall, face stony, arms crossed. I've already submitted all necessary documentation through internal channels. That's not what I asked, Malik replied. Hand it over. Redden's eyes flicked toward the cockpit, seeking backup. But none came. Captain Orange Drexel stood near the door, his face pale, his stance uncertain. Reluctantly, Redden tapped his wrist device, uploading the log. Malik's fingers danced across his screen. Seconds ticked, then his brows furrowed. Override lock was active during a documented pediatric medical emergency, he said aloud. System logs confirm it was manually engaged and never released. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. But it wasn't over. Passengers had risen from their seats, phones in hand. One man raised his arm. I record a part of it. He gave the kid peanuts. Another added, Here, look at this. He lied when asked. The screen played a short clip, Kalen asking, These aren't peanuts, right? Followed by Redden's smooth lie. No, sir, these are safe. The camera captured the smirk. Malik reviewed the footage in silence. Then he looked at Redden. I need you to come with me. Now. Redden opened his mouth, but no words came. He turned slightly, as if expecting someone, anyone, to intervene. But no one did. The officers who had arrived to detain Kalen now flanked Redden instead. They didn't need to be told twice. One secured Redden's arm gently but firmly. You have the right to remain silent, he began, voice steady. Captain Drexel remained rooted in place, hands clasped behind his back. He looked at Kalen, guilt flashing across his face. He had almost sided with a saboteur. Kalen, still seated, adjusted the blanket draped over Jalen's body. The boy stirred faintly, eyes fluttering. Kalen whispered something inaudible, something soft and personal. Malik stepped beside him. We'll debrief you once you're settled. Medical staff is waiting at the terminal. Kalen nodded. The aircraft doors hissed open. Air rushed in from the jet bridge. As Redden was escorted away, a passenger leaned into the aisle and muttered, Good. Let the cameras catch this too. Kalen didn't watch Redden go. He didn't need to. Instead, he leaned down, kissed the crown of his son's head, and whispered, You're safe now. And in that moment, safety wasn't just a promise, it was a verdict. The attendant smirked, confident his act would go unpunished, unaware that every violation, every witness, and every legal avenue had already been prepared to hit back instantly. If you believe cruelty under privilege always folds when strategy meets authority, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. The lawsuit was filed less than 72 hours after the wheels touched down, but the moment it hit Valersky's legal desk, it detonated like a pressure bomb inside the airline's compliance division. The name on the header was unmistakable, Dravon V. Valersky Aviation and Red and Voss, and the claims cut deep. Intentional endangerment, suppression of medical access, obstruction of emergency protocols, and falsified data reporting. But while the legal gears began to churn in official channels, Kalen Dravon wasn't interested in courtroom revenge alone. His target wasn't just Redden. It was the entire invisible structure that allowed someone like him to hide behind corporate protocol and turn a child vulnerability into a weapon. Inside his temporary Velron Hotel suite, Kalen stood at the window, one hand gently resting on Jalen's shoulder as his son lay asleep in bed. The rhythmic pulse of a heart monitor clipped to Jalen's finger gave soft, steady beeps. A medical team had cleared the boy's vitals, but emotionally, the trauma had curled in tight. He flinched in his sleep, murmured incomprehensible fragments, and refused to eat unless Kalen prepared it himself. Across the room, Malik Varon typed furiously on a laptop balanced across his knees, cross-referencing flight logs with Valersky's override protocols. We've got timestamp inconsistencies, Malik said. Redden locked the panel exactly 30 seconds after the allergy alert lit up on the main cabin screen. That's not negligence, that's timing. Intentional timing. Kalen nodded, jaw clenched. Find everything. Every override, every service log, every comm burst to ground control. You didn't act alone. What makes you say that? Malik asked. Kalen turned toward the bedside table where the now infamous black case rested. Because he was too prepared. He knew about that case before I boarded. And the only way he could have known that is if someone fed it to him. The trail broke open the next morning when Malik decrypted a packet of internal crew messages stored in the aircraft's onboard tablet backup. Among them was a flag phrase that froze both men where they stood. This disruption log will tank Dreven's compliance rating. We'll own the vote if we push hard enough. It was sent by a senior field strategist at Brannick Systems, Kalen's primary competitor in the upcoming Eldric's Regulatory Council vote. Suddenly, everything clicked. Reden's hostility wasn't random. It wasn't just resentment. It was a contract hit, not with fists or weapons, but with sabotage designed to corrupt credibility. Kalen sat down slowly, the air thick with realization. They promised him something, he whispered. Something big. Malik nodded. Promotion. Maybe even equity. If his disruption got flagged at the council level, your compliance metrics would tank. They'd get the majority contract. The camera footage from the flight, combined with system overrides and Reden's false reports, painted a clear picture. But now they needed to go deeper, to subpoena Brannick's communications, uncover the payment trail, and expose the full architecture of betrayal. That evening, Kalen visited Jalen's bedside again, watching the boy sketch quietly with trembling hands. The paper showed an airplane tray with a giant red X over a bowl. Above it, a single word was scribbled in shaky lettering. Why? Kalen knelt beside him. He did it because some people think truth is dangerous, he said softly. But that truth, it also makes us strong. Jalen blinked slowly, still groggy from fatigue. Are we going to stop them? Kalen touched his forehead gently. We're going to do more than stop them. We're going to make sure no one else ever gets hurt like that again. Meanwhile, Malik worked late into the night, dispatching formal testimony requests to passengers who had filmed the incident. Each witness statement strengthened their case. A father from Seat 2C wrote, I saw Kalen ask twice about the snack. He was calm, clear, and responsible. Redin lit. A businessman in 3A submitted timestamp video showing Redin smirking as he served the bowl. The footage became critical evidence, not just of the incident, but of Redin's intent. But it was one final message, buried in Brannick Systems' subpoenaed internal logs, that caused Malik to exhale sharply. He walked across the room, holding his tablet. Kalen, listen to this. Internal memo from Brannick's regional VP. He read aloud. If disruption logs are tied to Dravon Tech's protocol failures, we project a 17% swing in the final vote. Redin Voss has confirmed delivery. Kalen didn't speak for several seconds. He only stared at Jalen's small hand as it reached for a new crayon. Then he stood. Then let's confirm our own delivery. He opened his briefcase and removed the sealed archive of Valor Sky's legacy safety system, the same registry he had helped build years earlier. It contained not just allergy data, but embedded trace logs of every crew override, including Redin's. Malik looked up. You're really going to take on the entire board? Kalen stared out the window, eyes cold and focused. I'm not taking on the board. I'm taking on the story they've been telling. And that strength was about to turn into the most unexpected leverage yet. The tribunal chamber echoed faintly with the sound of the commissioner's gavel striking the polished marble table. Proceed, the clerk announced, stepping aside as Kalen Dravon entered the chamber with calm precision. He moved like a man who had rehearsed every step in his mind, not for vanity, but for necessity. Seated beside him was Malik Varon, his legal liaison, whose quiet intensity balanced Kalen's colder resolve. Across the table, under the broad skylight casting stripes of light across the polished floor, sat Redin Voss. If there had ever been arrogance in Redin's posture, it had melted. His suit looked tight around the neck, and the tremor in his hand betrayed more than nerves. It was fear that the scaffolding he built was finally collapsing. The commissioner wasted no time. This hearing concerns the emergency incident on Valor Sky, Flight 771, involving a minor passenger with a flag class 3 allergen restriction. Mr. Voss, as crew lead, you are under review for procedural breach, endangerment, and suppression of medical protocols. You may begin your statement. Redden stood, cleared his throat, and forced a polite tone. Your Honor, the events in question were misinterpreted due to what I believe was protocol confusion under high-pressure conditions. My intent was always to maintain order and prioritize safety. Sit. The commissioner interrupted sharply. Malik stood before the judge could blink. With respect, I believe we can clarify the confusion in question. He tapped his tablet, and the chamber lights dimmed as a projection filled the sidewall. The flight logs appeared, clear, digital, irrefutable. Time-stamped entries showing the override activation. The refusal of oxygen access. The entry flagging a passenger misconduct incident at 1407. The allergy alert ignored at 1358. Each line drove a nail into the defense. Redden shifted. His eyes darted to his attorney, who said nothing. Silence made the truth louder. We aren't done, Malik added. A second tap. Audio played. There was the faint clatter of utensils. A pause. Then Redden's voice, grainy but unmistakable. If I serve the kid peanuts, he'll panic. That'll stir enough mess to flag Kalen's name. The tribunal room stilled. For a moment, even breath felt out of place. Kalen's eyes didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He watched Redden, who now looked as if every particle of air betrayed him. Redden's attorney stood and muttered, requesting recess on grounds of surprise evidence. Denied, snapped the commissioner. This evidence was submitted via sealed pretrial disclosure. You had time. Kalen finally spoke. My son's airway closed while Mr. Voss was playing strategy. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to keep my child alive. The commissioner leaned forward. Then answer me this, Dr. Dravon. Why didn't you stop him sooner? Kalen paused only long enough to make the words matter. Because I was trying to save my son, not win an argument. A hush swept through the courtroom like the moment between lightning and thunder. And when the thunder came, it was from the outside world. Viewers across the tribunal live stream flooded the chat with a single phrase, #protocol or poison. The narrative shifted. Redden's attorney sank in his seat. But it didn't end there. Malik raised a new document. An internal memo leaked just hours earlier from Brannick Systems. It wasn't lengthy, but it didn't have to be. The subject line read, Contingency bonus offer. Negative exposure of Dravon Systems prior to CRC vote. A Brannick executive had signed off on compensation in the event Kalen's company was discredited during the regulatory vote. The air left the room again. Kalen didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He only adjusted his tie and glanced toward the wide glass windows where the plaza below shimmered in sunlight. A man from the tribunal's ethics review panel leaned to whisper something to the commissioner. Another assistant scribbled notes furiously. Redden had stopped blinking. His hands, once defiant, now simply clung to the edge of the table like a man lost at sea. Malik rested his hand lightly on Kalen's shoulder. It was quiet encouragement, nothing more, but Kalen didn't need it. He looked at Redden one last time, not as a rival, not even as a saboteur, but as a man who gambled on a child's suffering and lost everything. And he no longer looked angry. He looked like a man turning a knife wound into a pressure valve. The gavel strike echoed through the arbitration chamber like a lightning crack, loud, final, and sharp enough to make the room fall still. The lead commissioner didn't wait for preamble. We find sufficient evidence for a provisional injunction. Effective immediately, Brannick Systems is barred from participating in the upcoming compliance vote. His voice, calm but cold, carried across the marble-lit room like a final verdict on years of silent maneuvering. Kalen didn't react. He sat perfectly still beside his legal counsel, one hand resting on the table, the other gently tapping the edge of a sealed folder labeled with his initials. His eyes remained focused, not on the commissioner, not on Redden Voss, who sat slouched and sweating 3 seats away, but on the quiet corner of the chamber where his son's face had once flashed through his mind in terror. A murmur rolled through the observers. Journalists in the back row tapped furiously at keyboards. Brannick's general counsel stood and motioned to speak, but was waved off. That's when the unexpected happened. A man in a tailored charcoal suit rose from the audience gallery and stepped forward. His presence seemed out of place, unannounced, unshaken, authoritative without trying. He presented credentials to the tribunal clerk and was invited to approach. "My name is Dr. Arlen Weiss," he said. "I represent the National Aeromedical Ethics Alliance. On behalf of the council, I'd like to extend an offer." Kalen turned his head slightly, eyes narrowing in cautious curiosity. Dr. Weiss continued, "Given Dr. Dreven's role in uncovering systemic manipulation of pediatric allergen protocols during in-flight emergencies and the resulting policy implications, the Alliance wishes to invite him to join our oversight board, effective immediately." Even the tribunal commissioner blinked. No one expected the ethics board to step in, let alone break protocol mid-session. Kalen's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering, "That seat's reserved for neutral advisors. This is a message." Kalen stood. His response was quiet, but his voice didn't waver. "I accept, not for the title, for the responsibility." His tone carried not pride, but purpose, a quiet weapon shaped by the edge of what he nearly lost. Jalen had nearly died. Now, the very system that failed him was placing Kalen at its helm. Redden Voss, who had been visibly shrinking with each new revelation, tried to interrupt, his voice cracking. "This is being spun. I followed protocol." He made a scene. He escalated. The tribunal commissioner raised his hand. "Mr. Voss, you are hereby stripped of all in-flight operational licenses pending a full investigation into conspiracy, medical obstruction, and endangerment. You may remain silent or submit a formal appeal through legal counsel." Redden sat down slowly, his hands trembling as he lowered his gaze. But the spectacle wasn't finished. Kalen cleared his throat and turned toward the panel. "One request before this session closes." The lead commissioner gave a cautious nod. "I ask that this body consider a policy resolution requiring all allergy risk registries used by airlines to sync with an independent medical server. A real-time data link, not company managed but ethics audited." Kalen paused, allowing the gravity to settle. Had that system been active, no crew override, no personal grudge, and no corrupted log could have blocked my son's access to care. The silence was immediate, but it wasn't empty. It was absorbing. Malik Varon, seated nearby as Kalen's federal liaison, leaned forward. "We call it the Drevon Sync Mandate," he added quietly. "Our draft's ready." The tribunal chamber lit up. Commissioners began reading digital briefings transmitted instantly to their devices. Within minutes, the vote was called. 11 votes in favor, 0 against. The Drevon Sync mandate passed unanimously. At the post-hearing press conference, Kalen stood at a modest podium in the courtyard, the mid-morning sun reflecting off the council seal behind him. Jalen stood beside him, holding tightly to his father's hand, his small fingers still marked faintly by the injector bruises from weeks before. Cameras flashed. Questions flew, but Kalen held up his hand. One reporter, bold and close, asked loudly, "What message do you want to send to the crews who dismissed a father's plea in real time?" Kalen looked directly into the lens, his voice steady and unflinching. "Allergy isn't drama. It's biology. Treat it like the emergency it is before someone treats you like the liability you are." Jalen sat at the corner of the living room couch, his knees tucked up, sketchbook balanced on his lap, crayons scattered like fallen leaves across the floor. He didn't speak much anymore, not about the flight, not about the peanuts, not about the moment his throat tightened and the world blurred. But he drew, and today's drawing was new. A child's rendering of an airplane, with a giant red exclamation mark hovering above a snack tray. The words "N.O. Peanuts" written in shaky block letters. Kalen watched from the doorway, silent. The living room was quiet except for the slow hissing of the humidifier they'd installed to help Jalen breathe easier during therapy. A soft beeping came from the monitoring device next to the couch, tracking his recovery stats. Each beep confirmed what Kalen already knew: his son was stable, but not the same. Later that evening, Kalen presented one of Jalen's drawings at a closed-door strategy meeting with his legal counsel and Malik Varon. The conference room at Dravon Systems was dimly lit, shades drawn against the city skyline. The image sat at the center of the table, casting a child's truth across corporate documents and court briefings. Malik picked it up carefully. "This," Malik said, holding the page like a fragile artifact, "is worth more than any statement you give on a podium." Kalen nodded, the weight of weeks compressing into the stiff line of his jaw. "We're not just dealing with bad decisions anymore," he said. "We're dealing with a system that lets someone like Redden think sabotage was a career move." The tension in the room thickened. Lawsuits were stacking against Brannick Systems, not just from Kalen, but from other compliance officers, physicians, and even former board advisors who had been pressured, ignored, or removed for raising allergy safety concerns. One of them, a medical data specialist named Dr. Hollenvaries, had submitted an affidavit describing how Brannick's leadership routinely dismissed flagged reports as non-critical narrative conflicts. That phrase, sterile and cruel, was now circling headlines. Malik leaned forward, tapping the table softly. "Their bylaws have a vulnerability. Clause 12. If any board member is found complicit in a regulatory suppression scandal, the shareholders can force a no-confidence vote." Kalen didn't flinch. "Then that's our breach point." And it was. Days later, a shareholder meeting was hastily called. Investors, watching Brannick's plummeting public image, demanded accountability. The vice president of strategic operations, Redden Voss's quiet backer, was removed by majority vote. His name was erased from the leadership page within hours. Brannick issued a public apology the next morning, naming both Kalen and Jalen. The statement used every polished phrase a PR team could draft: deep regret, tragic oversight, commitment to reform. But Kalen refused the olive branch. Instead, he countered with a funding proposal for something new: clear path. "This isn't just for Jalen," Kalen explained during a joint strategy call with Malik and the team from the National Pediatric Aviation Safety Forum. "It's for every kid whose parents still have to ask twice if the snack is safe, and every parent who's been told they're overreacting." ClearPath would be more than a watchdog. It would be an alliance. Medical tech developers, pediatric allergists, airline compliance advisors, and a rotating board of affected parents would build a blueprint for zero-risk snack protocols in all major airliners. It would be powered by real-time data, not outdated spreadsheets. It would not ask for apologies. It would demand prevention. Brannick's board, under immense pressure, hesitated. Funding a project, led by the man they tried to discredit? The irony was too raw. But the tide turned the moment their own financial analysts ran the numbers. Negative press coverage had triggered a wave of retractions from partner airlines. Shareholder confidence was bleeding. One Brannick board member reportedly said, "It's cheaper to fund his program than fight his story." And so they did. The vote passed with a 6-1 margin. Brannick Systems would supply the first round of ClearPath's infrastructure funding. Back in Kalen's office, Malik handed him the signed agreement. "That didn't change their mind," Kalen said quietly, eyes scanning the document. "They just changed their math." Malik smiled, setting his briefcase down. Sometimes justice sounds like numbers screaming. Kalen didn't reply at first. He turned toward the glass window, watching the city lights flicker in patterns only he could interpret now. His reflection, overlaid with the skyline, looked older, but steadier. "And this time," he said at last, it screamed loud enough to get funded. The room fell quiet just as the steward stepped back from the podium and announced the next name, Dr. Kalen Dravon. A moment passed, then a ripple of polite applause followed as Kalen rose from the front row and gently helped his 10-year-old son, Jalen, to his feet. The boy wore a charcoal gray blazer 2 sizes too large and clutched his father's hand tightly. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly, casting a warm amber hue over the Valor Sky Integrity Center's glass-paneled ceremony hall. It was the 1-year anniversary of Flight 771, the flight that had nearly cost Jalen his life. Now, the airline was about to unveil the very reforms born from that moment of terror. But for Kalen, This wasn't closure. It was the beginning of accountability made visible. He walked with quiet control toward the small stage where Orrin Drexel, captain of Flight 771, stood waiting with a medal in hand. Drexel's posture was formal, but his eyes revealed remorse. As Kalen approached, Drexel extended a hand and then leaned in, voice low enough that only Kalen could hear. "I should have acted faster," he said. "I failed you both." Kalen nodded once. "You acted just in time to see the truth. That's more than most." The microphone clicked on as Drexel turned to the audience. "Today, we honor courage not just in action, but in restraint." When protocol became a wall, Dr. Drayvon chose not to break it, but to build something better around it. The Concord Honor Badge shimmered as Drexel placed it over Kalen's lapel. Another, smaller pin was handed to Jalen, who blinked at it as if unsure whether to smile. Kalen crouched beside him and whispered, "This is yours, not mine." You reminded everyone what this fight was for. Jalen clutched the pin and stepped toward the podium. The hall fell utterly silent. His voice was thin but clear. "I'm okay now. Just don't let this happen to another kid." Applause broke like a wave. Not thunderous, but sincere, raw with the recognition that this moment, quiet as it was, marked something irreversible. Among the rows of seated crew members, doctors, and aviation executives, a few shifted uncomfortably. They knew the cost of delay. They saw it in Jalen's tremble, and they knew what had to come next. Later that evening, as the last of the guests filtered out and the stage was dismantled, Kalen sat alone in a small lounge just off the main hall. A steaming mug of untouched tea rested on the table beside him. In his lap sat a hardbound folder, black, unmarked, but inside were the documents that had ignited a movement. Sealed transcripts, cross-referenced override logs, and a private letter from the tribunal confirming the passage of the Drayvon Sync mandate. Every airline now had to adhere to the real-time allergy registry Kalen had designed, with override blocks monitored independently from crew command. He flipped through the pages slowly, not to read them again, but to feel them. Each sheet was heavy with something that paper usually didn't carry: responsibility. He could still hear Jalen's choking breath from that day, still see the flash of doubt in the captain's eyes before oxygen was denied. Even now, he didn't feel vindicated. He felt haunted, but that haunting had a purpose. A small pair of feet padded into the room. Jalen, now in sweatpants and a hoodie, crawled up beside him on the couch. "Dad," he asked. Kalen closed the file slowly. "Yeah. Are we done now?" Kalen looked at him for a long second. He thought of the airlines still resisting change. He thought of Brannick Systems still under audit. He thought of every parent who would board a plane tomorrow, hoping their child's medical condition wouldn't be treated like an inconvenience. He reached out, ruffled Jalen's hair gently, and smiled, not with satisfaction, but with readiness. "We're just getting started." And in that new beginning, safety had a name, and it was spelled in full. Seat 1, flag green for allergy compliance. The crew tablet read, as the boarding process completed on Aryan Sky, Flight 742. The lead attendant nodded once, confirming the alert. It was the kind of quiet success story no one would ever hear about, except one man seated in that very row, watching it happen with eyes that had seen too much to celebrate too soon. Dr. Kalen Drayvon gave a quiet nod back to the attendant, who recognized him instantly. "Thank you, Dr. Drayvon," the man said as he offered Jalen a sealed snack card instead of a verbal menu. "Your system helped a passenger last week during turbulence." The alert triggered just in time. Kalen smiled faintly, one hand resting on his son's shoulder as Jalen browsed through a sketch pad. But behind that smile lived a wariness that hadn't dulled with time. He studied the color-coded indicators on the seatback display: green for allergy safe, amber for standard sensitivity, and red for restricted zones. All of it had come from a sleepless 3-month window of trauma, litigation, reform, and reconstruction. And now here it was. Real, functional, trusted. But Kalen knew better than to believe that progress was the same as peace. The ClearPath app had launched with minimal fanfare, but within a week, Download rates spiked among pediatricians, single fathers, and travelers with chronic allergies. What once required long-form email filings and verbal reminders at the gate was now synced between passenger booking systems and crew tablets. The system Kalen and Malik Varan had coded from the bones of legal trauma had transformed into a living interface, one that warned crew before a snack ever touched a tray. Kalen sat back, watching as Jalen nodded politely to a younger attendant who checked his wristband barcode. It synced clean. Another silent success. Yet beneath the efficient atmosphere of this new flight, Kalen's mind swam in deeper currents. Dravon Systems had just cleared a preliminary vote to introduce pediatric oxygen delivery protocols across all federal-compliant airline partners. The new oxygen masks, shaped for children's nasal ratios and designed with trauma reduction fabrics, would go to council next month. But there were murmurs already. A former compliance rival had hinted at blocking the vote. Not Brannick Systems this time. Someone new. Kalen could feel it coming, not a direct attack, but an economic reshuffling masked in policy. And this time, no flight would trigger the alert. "Dad," Jalen whispered, pulling at his sleeve. He said thanks for saving that other kid. Kalen blinked and turned toward his son. Jalen was holding a new drawing, a cockpit scene, but the captain's face was shaped like a lion's. Kalen smiled, warmth replacing the tactical storm inside him. "That's you," Jalen added, pointing to the lion. "Because you didn't roar, but they still listened." Kalen exhaled slowly, steadying himself in the moment. Hours later, back at the headquarters of ClearPath, a mural was being unveiled in the main lobby. Technicians adjusted spotlights, while crew safety officers and pediatric allergists mingled in the marble atrium. Malik stood by the glass elevator, tapping something into his phone, until a voice called over the intercom, "Final dedication to the man who helped rebuild how we fly." The curtains pulled back. Painted on the high wall was a scene of swirling white clouds breaking into calm blue. Rising from a mist, a single phrase in bold lettering. "Protocol is only noble when it protects the powerless." Below it, in smaller script, etched in metallic silver, Jalen's Law, enacted year 17, post-mandate. Kalen didn't step forward to speak. He just stood quietly at the back of the room, one hand in his pocket, the other resting gently on Jalen's shoulder. Reporters flashed photos. Members of the Aviation Council stood in respectful silence. But inside, Kalen knew this was not an ending. It was a border crossing. He turned to Malik, who met his glance knowingly. They had fought the same fire once. Now, they were laying cables across the next minefield. Because systems can be copied. Protocols can be twisted. And safety isn't something you win once. It's something you re-win every day. Jalen tugged his arm gently. "Are we flying again next month?" Kalen nodded. "Probably." Jalen looked up at the mural. "Will they remember?" Kalen didn't answer right away. Then, just above a whisper, he said, "Only if we keep reminding them." And in a quiet corner of the room, under soft lighting and gentle applause, Kalen knew one thing for certain. That law wasn't written in ink. It was written in air, fear, and a father's refusal to let silence win. The father calmly handed over the court papers, leaving the crew stunned and the cabin silent, as accountability landed instantly. If you believe real authority combines protection, preparation, and decisive action, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights abuse of authority, prejudice, and the power of composure and legal accountability in confronting wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, justice, and protecting every family with dignity and respect.